This is Semion Mogilevich, often whispered about as the mastermind behind one of the world's most elusive and powerful criminal empires. In May 1995, he was set to attend a high-profile gathering in Prague at his own restaurant, Holubů. The occasion? A birthday party for one of the top figures in the Russian Mafia. But this wasn't just any party, it was a meeting of some of the most feared and dangerous men in the world. Among them was Sergei Mikhailov, the head of the notorious Solntsevskaya Bratva, a man whose name alone could send shivers down anyone's spine. But Mogilevich was a man caught between two worlds, the calculated strategist who built his empire through cunning and manipulation, and the constant target of those who wanted to bring him down. As he prepared to step into the gathering that night, little did he know, or perhaps he did, that this was more than just a celebration. It was a deadly trap. Rumors were swirling that some members of the Solntsevskaya Bratva had grown tired of Mogilevich's influence and were planning to take him out that very night over a $5 million dispute. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, with every guest on edge, aware that the slightest misstep could mean the difference between life and death. But as the night progressed, something strange happened. The guest of honor, Mogilevich, never showed up. It was as if he vanished into thin air, leaving everyone to wonder. Did he know about the plot? Was he tipped off by someone on the inside? Or was he simply always one step ahead of everyone else? And then, in the middle of this eerie absence, Czech police stormed the restaurant. They had been tipped off about the assassination plot and were there to prevent a bloodbath. Dozens of Mafia members were detained, but the one man they wanted most, Mogilevich, was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had evaporated into the night, leaving behind only questions and whispers. What really happened that night in Prague? Did Mogilevich outsmart his enemies once again? Or was there something even more sinister at play? The mystery lingers, and the more you learn about this enigmatic figure, the more you realize how deep the rabbit hole goes. This was the night that could have changed everything, but instead, it left the world craving answers that may never come. The man who would rise to become a shadowy figure in the criminal world seemed, at first glance, an unlikely candidate for such infamy. Semion Mogilevich, a man of unremarkable appearance and demeanor, did not stand out as he navigated the bustling streets of Kiev. Born on a quiet summer day in 1946, Mogilevich was just another face in the crowd, an unassuming young man raised in a Jewish family in the Podil neighborhood. There was little to suggest that he would one day command a criminal empire stretching across continents. After earning a degree in economics from the University of Lviv, Mogilevich initially appeared destined for a life of modest success. His early ventures, however, would reveal a far more cunning and ruthless character than anyone could have anticipated. He had begun his rise through the criminal underworld by defrauding Soviet Jews desperate to emigrate. These early scams, where he promised to sell their valuables and send them the proceeds, only to pocket the money, marked the beginning of a career that would soon become legendary. But little else is known about Mogilevich's formative years. His Soviet records remain sealed, and those who crossed paths with him during his rise to power have either been silenced or remain too fearful to speak. What is clear, however, is that by the time he aligned himself with the Solntsevskaya Bratva in the 1980s, Mogilevich had already carved out a reputation for himself, one that was built not just on his sharp mind, but on a willingness to do whatever it took to secure his place at the top of the criminal hierarchy. Mogilevich's empire grew rapidly, fueled by a combination of shrewd business decisions and ruthless tactics. His move to Hungary in 1991 was more than just a change of scenery. It was a calculated step toward expanding his criminal reach across Europe. From his fortified villa outside Budapest, Mogilevich quietly purchased businesses that would serve as fronts for his illicit operations. Among these acquisitions was a once-defunct armament factory, which he revived and used to produce anti-aircraft guns, further embedding himself in the underworld of arms trafficking. His most strategic move, however, was the acquisition of Incombank, a major private bank in Russia. This wasn't just about money, it was about power. With direct access to the global financial system, Mogilevich now had the means to launder vast sums of money, moving it effortlessly across borders and through a web of over 100 front companies spread across 27 countries. Incombank was his gateway to the world, allowing him to finance his operations on an unprecedented scale. But Mogilevich's ambitions didn't stop at the financial sector. In the early 1990s, he recognized the potential of the energy market and began to extend his influence there as well. He infiltrated the natural gas pipelines that were the lifeblood of Russia and Eastern Europe, controlling significant portions of the energy flow. Through a series of complex deals and alliances, Mogilevich positioned himself as a key player in the region's energy sector, further entrenching his power and making himself indispensable to both legitimate businesses and criminal enterprises alike. Yet, even as his empire expanded, Mogilevich remained a shadowy figure, his true power obscured by layers of secrecy and deception. His operations were global, his influence vast, but to the outside world, he was little more than a ghost, an invisible hand guiding the criminal underworld from behind the scenes. On an evening in May 1995 in Prague, a secretive gathering was held at a restaurant called Holubů. This wasn't just any party, it was a birthday celebration for someone in the Russian Mafia, attended by dangerous people. The restaurant was owned by Semion Mogilevich, a notorious criminal. Among the guests was Sergei Mikhailov, a feared Mafia boss. But this party didn't end with just cake and drinks. The police suddenly raided the place, arresting over 200 people, including many women who were there against their will. The police had heard that there was a plan to kill Mogilevich over a $5 million argument. However, Mogilevich wasn't there. It seems someone in the police who was secretly working with the Mafia had warned him in time. After the raid, the Czech government banned Mogilevich from entering the country for 10 years. Hungary kicked him out too, and Britain declared him one of the most dangerous men in the world. Once again, Mogilevich had managed to escape, adding to his reputation as someone who could always slip away just in time. Just a few years after the Prague incident, Mogilevich set the stage for what would become one of the most audacious financial crimes in modern history. YBM Magnex International Inc., a company that appeared as a legitimate player on the Toronto Stock Exchange, was, in truth, a carefully constructed facade. From 1993 to 1998, Mogilevich orchestrated a scheme that defrauded thousands of investors out of $150 million. The company, which claimed to produce industrial magnets, was, in reality, nothing more than a sophisticated money laundering operation. Mogilevich's genius was in his meticulous manipulation of financial systems. He created forged documents, twisted the arms of stock market insiders, and inflated YBM's stock value by nearly 2,000%. Investors were none the wiser, entrusting their fortunes to what they believed was a booming enterprise. But as with all things too good to be true, the facade began to crack. The end came swiftly. The FBI, working alongside international law enforcement agencies, raided YBM's headquarters in Pennsylvania. The raid sent shockwaves through the financial world as YBM's stock plummeted, leaving a trail of financial ruin in its wake. Investors who once saw YBM as a golden opportunity were left grasping at the ashes of their shattered dreams. This operation was more than just a financial hit. It was a statement. It marked Mogilevich as a criminal mastermind whose reach and intellect made him a formidable opponent for law enforcement around the globe. As the dust settled from the Bank of New York scandal, Mogilevich's name began to loom larger, not just in the world of organized crime, but in the global financial markets he so deftly manipulated. His fingerprints were everywhere, from the billions he funneled through bank accounts across continents to the under-the-table deals that left economies reeling. The $10 billion he laundered was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, his operations were even more sinister. In the late 1990s, Mogilevich orchestrated a vast tax fraud scheme across Central Europe that exploited a glaring loophole in the system. His men were selling untaxed heating oil as if it were expensive, heavily taxed car fuel, a seemingly small deception that turned into a monumental financial heist. The scale of the operation was staggering, draining billions from government coffers. The Czech Republic alone saw an estimated $5 billion evaporate, with Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland suffering similarly devastating losses. Despite the massive scale of these crimes, Mogilevich remained elusive, a shadow in the background. His ability to manipulate global systems with such precision, while staying a step ahead of the authorities, was both astonishing and terrifying. For law enforcement, the challenge wasn't just in catching him, it was in understanding how he could pull the strings of so many without ever being seen. One after another, whispers of influence and power began to circulate, tracing their way back to the man who had become a ghost to the world, but a giant within Russia. It's said that Mogilevich's connection to power goes far beyond the underworld, reaching into the highest echelons of the Russian government. The murmurs grow louder with each telling, alleging that Mogilevich's relationship with none other than Vladimir Putin dates back to the days when Putin walked the streets of Leningrad, long before he became the formidable figure he is today. This rumored connection is not just a bond of old acquaintances, but a shield, a level of protection that only someone in Putin's circle could provide. And yet, while Mogilevich's name sits on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, he remains an enigma, untouched and out of reach. Since 2009, when his name was added to that infamous list, international law enforcement has looked on with frustration as Mogilevich continues to elude capture. His sanctuary, the heart of Moscow, a city that, under the protection of the Russian government, keeps him safe from the long arm of international justice. For those who seek him, Moscow is both a fortress and a taunt, a reminder that as long as he stays within Russian borders, he remains untouchable. Today, Mogilevich moves freely within Moscow's shadowy circles, living a life that most can only imagine. With passports that span multiple nations, Russian, Israeli, Ukrainian, Greek, he holds the keys to a life of movement and mystery. In certain parts of the world, he is as free as the air, a man who, despite his notoriety, continues to walk among the elite, unseen and unchallenged.